love the stuff that we were messaging earlier about.
Yes.
I think you had a good laundry list of things we had to cover.
Yeah, so we've been gone a couple weeks because we were in New York doing an awesome filming shoot with a restaurant that's been heavily impacted by COVID. And so we're making a nice documentary about that.
I saw
but that's why we've been out of town.
It looked pretty sharp. The opening, I mean, you guys did a pretty talented job from a little bit that I saw of it.
Thank you. There's a shot in there that I helped light that I'm very proud of with big dramatic shadows on the wall with these actual new lights that we're using.
Did you envision this?
No, I was just moving the light around and I was like, look at those amazing shadows. They're kind of surreal. It's a little like Tim Burton-y, and I was like, those are so cool. They'll never let me use those. And then they filmed them, so that's kind of cool.
Well done.
Thank you.
Was the trip fun overall, too?
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I haven't been out of town very much in the last year, and I haven't been to New York in a long time. It was Brooklyn, and it's really fun to go to New York. And so we got to hang out with Kara there, and we got to go to an Irish pub and go to a German place, and, had a lot of fun filming. It was a great shoot. And I
got to go out?
Yeah, we got to go out. You got to go out in bars.
Oh, the picture of, what was Matt eating again?
Oh, he had a big, pork, I don't even know what pork shank, half a pig, basically.
It looked amazing.
It's ridiculous.
I think I was scrummaging through leftovers that evening too in my own house. I could really go for that instead of this.
Yeah, it was nice to do something different.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So what's going on this week? How are you?
I'm doing good. Coming off birthday week last week.
Oh, happy birthday.
Thank you. Tried to get a haircut and a beard trim last week.
I desperately need a haircut. I was going to go yesterday, but my barber is not working, so I have to go back later.
So missed doing our podcast, but it was, you guys are off doing good things. So, certainly a lot to catch up on this week. I mean, we've had Trump got back in the news this week.
Yeah.
We had a lot of other exciting unfoldings. We bombed Syria.
Always fun.
While we were arguing about genders in Congress.
Yeah, but the bombs were nice and friendly and didn't say sexist things on Twitter, so, it's fine.
Perfect.
Fine.
I'm sure the Syrian kids just were so happy that it was such progressive, forward-thinking bombs.
Yeah, I'm sure they don't mind. So I actually need to keep track of how much time we're spending on this so the cameras don't cut off.
But yeah, you sent over. Where do you want to start? Because you had, we were hitting.
Yeah, so kind of the main theme I've been thinking about this week is kind of sensitivity. The way everyone's gotten very sensitive about everything, and it was sparked by a number of things. One of the things was we never go to CPAC, which I'm pleased to report. I don't like to go to CPAC, but I've actually never been. But CPAC had a big scandal about their stage being apparently shaped like a Nazi symbol and everybody freaking out about that. And there was a long conversation on Clubhouse that I was part of where people were debating it and everyone's miserable and unhappy about it. And I thought the whole thing was ridiculous. And it kind of led into this whole thought process about, being oversensitive and the role of symbolism and the role of iconography. And it was an interesting conversation. A lot of people I thought had made very bad points, but a lot of people made very good points. So maybe we'll start there.
Yeah, give me a synopsis there. So, of, I guess, the sensitivity. So, do people presume this stage shape was planned by the Republicans? Or it's ironic that the Nazi symbol...
Well, it's hard to know if any of this is in good faith, is the thing. Because I think a lot of people just want to make Republicans look bad and call them Nazis, and this gives them a way to do that. I think it's very, very unlikely. Well, first of all, a little background is that the shape of the stage was this... it's like a Norse rune. And it's kind of like a triangle with two wings coming off of it. And it's an old 1,000-year-old symbol, couple 1,000-year-old symbol. It was used in the Norse alphabet or possibly the Anglo-Saxon, I'm not really sure. And one specific branch of Nazis used it. It's actually, I had never seen it as a Nazi symbol before. I was completely unfamiliar with this until it came up. But apparently one specific branch of Nazis used it because Nazis used a lot of symbology and a lot of symbolism. And they were fans of taking other people's iconography and making it their own and using it. And so there's a lot of that stuff. And so you can't actually notice it if you're on the ground at CPAC looking at the stage. But if you're above and you take a photo of the stage looking down at the Hyatt Hotel, it does look a little bit like that symbol. And so people are saying, oh, look, the Republicans are Nazis. They need to change it. And some people are saying they did it on purpose, which I find it really, really hard to believe that anybody would be like, oh, yeah, we're going to use a Nazi symbol deliberately and no one's going to notice. I don't believe anybody is that stupid. Or maybe it's a coincidence, which I think it's probably a coincidence. But some people are saying, even if it is a coincidence, you still have to take it down and change it because people are offended and it hurts their feelings, which I think is wrong as well. And so there was a long conversation about that.
Dad, this is all that's fascinating that people can get so. I mean, you could see it, and you can almost say like that's ironic. Like if you hate the Republican Party that much and associate them with Nazism, and I mean the right does it all the time to the left too. Anytime they can make a link to, usually typically the Soviet Union, they'll look for the side. It's like we're looking for something to validate our biases or our worldview. So I get that a little bit, but I figure that it's amazing. Yeah, it's baffling to me that we can get so worked up about something that's you can't really come to a hard conclusion one way or the other. So it's almost like you want to hate. You just want to have an excuse to hate or something.
Well, part of it is I think, people who want to change it, they're probably not going to be happy even if they do change it, because the people who want it changed are largely people who hate Republicans and conservatives anyway. And so if you change it for them, they're not going to be happy about that. You're really not making anybody happy by changing it. But I mean, more importantly than that, I think, is this idea that like a symbol can be forever tainted by somebody using it in a bad way. And like, I don't think one of the people who was talking on this Clubhouse meeting was talking about the swastika. And he was saying the swastika is an ancient Hindu symbol, and he's a Hindu. And he's like, it's a symbol of my religion. And it always has been for thousands of years. It's a symbol of my religion. And you can't tell me you're going to take away symbols of my religion because the Nazis, who I have no connection to and have nothing about, did something bad with that symbol. Suddenly you're destroying an entire people's religious symbol that they've had for thousands of years because of that. He said, that's ridiculous. You can't do that. And I think that's a really good point. Where like, what if I started a hate group? Well, let's not say me for the sake of argument. Yeah. Let's say what if someone started a hate group tomorrow and their symbol was the Star of David? Like, we're a hate group and our symbol was the Star of David. Would that mean that the Jewish people could no longer use the Star of David ever again, even though they've used it for thousands of years? Just because this one evil group decided to use it as their symbol? Like, that seems like you can't... Like, people are all upset about cultural appropriation. You shouldn't be able to just take someone's symbol that they've had for a long time and ruin it for them.
Yeah. Again,
it seems wrong to me.
Yeah, I see that like the scale and the massive size of the movement that the Third Reich was gigantic.
Yeah.
But I guess you could relate...
Not as gigantic as Hinduism.
No, nowhere close.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, but on a much smaller scale, in a way, the KKK did appropriate the cross in a lot of ways. They would throw up burning crosses. So, again, that's such a small data point. I mean, the KKK was never that substantial to begin with.
Right.
But, I mean, you could, I guess, follow that logic and say, oh, because the KKK used the cross, now it's a hate symbol.
Well, there's another
Christianity, you're screwed. Go find yourself a new symbol.
There was another example where, like, early in the Trump presidency, he had something that had an eagle on it, and they were saying, "Oh, it's a Nazi eagle. Look at that Nazi eagle." And it's like, well, yeah, the Nazis used eagles, and so did FDR. And so like the National Recovery Act that he passed for the Great Depression has the same eagle symbol on it, and that's a national bird of America. The eagle is an American symbol too. And so, yeah, you can't just say nobody can use eagles anymore because the Nazis used eagles. It seems silly to me.
It's amazing. I feel like these... Let's pause here and dive into this.
Go ahead and make your point. But I will say real quick that this is my favorite rum. It's Diplomatico. It's the only decent thing that comes out of Venezuela anymore. It's a Venezuelan rum. And I discovered it last January, right before COVID hit, at Universal Studios in Florida. I went at a hotel that had an extensive rum bar. And I'd never been a rum drinker, but they had like 150 types of rum. And I bought a bunch of samplers and tried all their rums neat. I've never had rum neat before. And this was one of the ones that I really loved and thought was delicious. So I thought we could taste some today.
I love it. The bottle, as I was saying earlier, is fantastic. It just looks like a classic bottle of liquor. Almost has that aesthetic view you get out of like Hollywood and maybe an old movie.
And it's nice and dark and like aged in barrels and stuff, so it looks pretty.
I did do a rum flight too. My last time I traveled to New Orleans and sat outside in a very historic area near Bourbon Street, eating my turtle soup and trying a flight of rum.
You had turtle soup? I've never had it.
It was very good.
I'd have to try it sometime. It sounds good.
Oh, that is delicious.
Isn't that great?
That is fantastic.
It's got a wonderful kind of caramelly character to it.
Oh, man. I want a bottle of this. That is just... Highly recommend it. I'll give it 5 stars. Diplomatico. I'm going to hunt for it now.
Good.
Yeah. Wow. Fantastic. Good choice.
Thank you.
But back to, I guess, where we left off before. Man, that was unbelievable rum. But... yeah, just how sensitive we are as a culture now, and how we get so worked up, and it's almost, I don't know, just frustrating, disheartening that it keeps us from having real conversations.
Yeah,
and maybe it's because social media erupts and it trends, but it's like we never actually have actual dialogue. Like we spent all week, whether it's arguing about the stage or in Congress arguing, having our congressional members debate and do little stupid media stunts over genders while actual things go undiscussed or unattended to that actually could make a difference in the world, or something we actually do need to flesh out philosophically, or actually like what do we really believe, but we just ignore it for this. I don't understand that. It's like we want to avoid the hard conversations, so we seek the easy outrage to somehow feel good about ourselves. I don't understand.
Well, it's even worse than that, I think, because not only are we being distracted from the real conversations, we're actually being prevented from being able to speak. Like, we can't talk at all for fear of offending people. And, part of this conversation that was being had the other day was like, well, we have to decide, we don't want to do harm to anybody. We have to make sure we don't harm anybody. And at some point along the line, the definition of harm got expanded to include hurting people's feelings. And like, oh, I was upset. But basically all you're saying, if you're saying I'm offended by that, is you're saying I don't like it. It made me unhappy. That's what you're saying. And so now we're saying, well, if someone doesn't like what you do, you're harming them and you have to stop. Well, like, you can't have a conversation like that. You can't have meaningful dialogue or meaningful speech to discover truth if you're worried that anything you say might be harmful to someone or might be upsetting to someone or might hurt their feelings. I think this is really dangerous. And it's just, I don't know how we got to this point where we can't even say a word or say express an idea or a thought without saying, you're harming me, you have to stop.
Do you think it's like we almost don't give each other the benefit of the doubt? Maybe it's a lack of, we want everyone to apologize, and we'll ruin your career, and we'll cast you out of society, but we'll never give you a chance for penance or forgiveness. And I think that before we even get to that point, that if it's almost like you're talking to someone, you almost have to apologize before you say anything. Like, oh, don't take this the wrong way.
Right.
Oh, I don't mean to offend. It's like you're trying to protect yourself before you even speak. But what happened to the ability, like, I know, Logan, you're not going to offend me, or you don't intend to offend me, but we actually want to have a real conversation with you. So even if you say something that makes me feel a little uncomfortable, I'm not like, oh, Logan's a horrible guy. I'm like, well,
absolutely.
Maybe it's on me to take a step back. Like, all right, what's Logan actually saying here? Or is he hitting on something that I've completely missed? Or I trust you in good faith.
And often if you feel that uncomfortableness, and this is true for me, I mean, people say stuff to me that makes me upset or feel bad or uncomfortable all the time. And it's never occurred to me to say, they can't say that. They shouldn't be allowed to say that. Like, often that's an invitation to kind of look at yourself and your own views and your own beliefs and say, well, why did I have that reaction? I had that reaction. Why? What's underneath that? Maybe I'm taking things the wrong way, or maybe I'm misconstruing something, or maybe I have a sensitivity that I shouldn't have. And, I think it's an invitation to look at yourself and realize, why am I being provoked by this kind of language? I should figure that out and look at it and think about it. But if you can't ever have that reaction because you've walled everybody off and you say, you can't say what you really think around me because I'll get upset, you're never going to have that moment of self-reflection. And
I feel, we miss out on so much when we have that reaction, because it could be, I have my preconceived biases where, someone could come in and say something off the bat that I just kind of disagree with, or I think they're saying something I disagree with, and I just immediately put up a wall where I don't give them the time of day. But then I miss out on, maybe they're a serious commentator, they have something very serious to say, and I'm not even giving them the opportunity, or I'm not even listening or hearing them anymore, and I actually missed out on something I could actually take away from them. Whether that could be reading a book or having an actual conversation. And I know we've hashed this out before where I think we disagree on maybe the terms, but I try to make the difference between ideology and philosophy, where I think in my terms, an ideology actually prevents you from seeing it from other angles. Like, here's my preconceived truth. Yeah. And as soon as let's say for me, it's like, I love Friedrich Hayek. So if someone says, this is Hayekian, worldview in a negative way, I could immediately shut that off. Or I could say, well, what are they actually trying to talk about here? And maybe just instead of building up that wall.
I think that's really important to try to assume other people are acting in good faith and they're not just trying to be offensive or abrasive for the sake of it, and try to understand what they're coming from, and giving people the benefit of the doubt and assuming, well, they may know something I don't know, they may have a different perspective than I have, let me try to listen to them and figure out what they really mean instead of just knee-jerk objecting to the words they use.
I feel like it's got to be something deeper now that's ingrained in our society, where we don't give people the benefit of the doubt anymore, or we're uncomfortable with different ideas, or we want everyone to subscribe to this collective agreed upon truth that
Well,
I don't know
think-
who decided it in the first place.
I think it's an arrogance of our culture now, and maybe this is not new. Maybe this has always been around, but I've noticed that people are very certain of themselves and very sure that they have the right answers. And this is something I kind of wanted to bring up because it bothered me. It happened the other week. I'm in a bunch of book clubs, and I was in a book club the other week. And every time I'm in one of these meetings and we read a book that's more than like 10 years old, someone has to come out with the obligatory, well, of course, it was a different time back then, and we have to kind of excuse all of their racism and their misogyny and their homophobia and their bigotry and their colonialism and all this stuff. And it has to be said every single time. And it kind of drives me crazy. And I feel like it's coming from this place of real hubris where we've only kind of had our current modern day values for, like, historically speaking, 5 minutes. Like, it's brand new. And like even things that happened like 5 years ago are already not okay. They're considered not acceptable. It's changing so fast. And I think people are so superior and so judgmental about people in the past for, the past several thousand years of recorded history. And they're like, oh, yeah, those ignorant fools, we know what's right now. We have it correct. And they didn't know anything. And we're going to be judgmental of them. And it kind of drives me nuts because I'm like, you just figured this out just now. Like, maybe have a little humility that, like, it's not the ultimate answer of the world. And I guarantee in 100 years, people are going to look back on things that you thought and say, look at that ignorant savage. They didn't know any better. They were prejudiced, or they were bigoted, or they were ignorant, or barbaric. I'm sure that's going to happen. And so, knowing that the future is going to judge you harshly, because I guarantee the future will judge us all harshly. Maybe we should be a little easier on the past and not be like, oh, all those people were such fools. They were so ignorant. They were so stupid. And I'm not saying, I want to be clear on this, like, I'm not saying they were right to be racist or sexist or colonialist or misogynist or any of those things. But I'm saying, like, we should be a little more charitable when we read books. It's understood that every book that was written, it comes from a time earlier than our own with different values. You don't need to point it out and be like, oh, look at these people. We're so much smarter than they are. Be a little more charitable to the great thinkers of the past and realize that they were working with the tools they had.
Yeah, and it's dangerous. I mean, we've seen this where if one person, and I've been guilty of it too, where if one person has one sin in their life or something we disagree with, we immediately take everything else they said, group it in with that disagreement, and everything they've thought, said, or did is no longer valid. And that's really dangerous because all of life is about discovering knowledge and new discoveries and innovation. And if we trash all of history, I think it's a G.K. Chesterton quote where it's tradition is the democracy of the dead. Mm-hmm. And what does that mean? It means there's a ton of discovery and struggles and mistakes that our ancestors went through.
Yeah.
And if we say, like, oh, they were wrong about this, we know they were wrong about this, so everything else that is associated with them must also be ignored. And you either get into the progressive mindset when we look back, where everything must be trashed and forgotten, which is very dangerous, because there's a lot of knowledge to be gleaned. Or you get into the super conservative mindset where everything is golden. And we cannot progress past whatever time period
Make
they've
America
latched
great
on
again.
to utopia.
Yeah.
Where I think at least the right mindset, or the one I think we need to strive for, is we need to preserve that which is good and reform what is bad. Mm-hmm. And that's the constant. And that's going to be, every generation has to do that.
Yeah. I mean, I think the ultimate struggle we're wrestling with here is that life is very complicated and people are very complicated. And like we have this tendency to want to write people off as there's a good person, there's a bad person, there's a tolerant person, there's a bigot, and nobody is that simple. Everybody has good aspects of their personality. Everybody has bad aspects of their personality. And you have to realize that people are made up of a lot of contradictory, contrasting impulses that don't always work well together or play well together. And I think you're right. We have to try to eliminate the bad to the extent that we can, but not throw out the baby with the bathwater, not throw out the good as well. I just watched a movie about the life of Dylan Thomas, the poet, and he's a genius poet. He's one of the best poets ever in the English language. But he was not a great guy, He was weak and cowardly, and he was, ruled by his passions, and he was drunk all the time, and, escaping his responsibilities, refusing to live up to his place in the world. And so your choices are to either say, oh, Dylan Thomas was a great man, or Dylan Thomas was a terrible man. But neither are true. Both are true. He was a genius in certain ways. He was a failure in other ways. And that's still true of every human being on the planet. They're good. They're smart in some ways. They're good in some ways. They're bad in other ways. And trying to just, put people into those little pigeonholes, I think, is a really dangerous impulse. But it seems to be very natural for us to want to do that.
Yeah, I was actually having a very similar, relevant conversation with a friend who is definitely traditionally conservative, which I have much sympathy for. On the economist Deidre McCloskey.
Yes.
Chicago. Just talking about how brilliant Deidre is.
I love Deidre. I know I've met her many times, and she's really cool.
Probably would you argue Deidre is the one of the preeminent economists alive today?
Yeah, I definitely think so.
Like, I mean, obviously you have Sol. I think Peter Becky would be up there, but I feel like she's up there.
Yeah, she's great.
And I just read a very short book on just writing tips that Deidre had written, and I was like, oh, this is an awesome book. You should totally read it. I feel like my writing will hopefully get better. And then as soon as I let the person know, like, oh, Deidre used to be Donald, and I told about the story and the paper I wrote where they locked, and like, oh, how can I? And the person immediately was like, how can I trust anything this person writes if they can't figure out the difference between, who they are? Right. And that, well, I tend to, as a Catholic Christian, believe, everyone's made beautifully image of God, and we shouldn't throw that away.
Right.
I don't understand, but I was like, that's only one aspect of Deidre, and there's a brilliant mind in there that is unquestionably brilliant.
Yeah.
And I would love to meet her. And
you don't have to.
I wouldn't even know what to say in a conversation to Deidre.
Yeah, you don't have to agree with every life choice someone makes or every aspect of their personality, depending on how you look at it, of someone to appreciate their good works. I think that's really true, and I'm a big fan of Deirdre both personally and professionally. I think she's great, and I have no issue with the way she's chosen to live her life. But I totally understand if people are uncomfortable with that, but that doesn't invalidate everything that she's done.
That's what I just couldn't be like. How can like this? I'm like, I have to read several of her books for grad school at George Mason because they're big fans of Deidre at George Mason, and it's just brilliant.
Well, there's just, I mean,
and I was like, how can you ignore this? It's unbelievable.
Spend all day listing historical figures who fit this thing. I mean, there's a saying that great men are seldom good men, and it's true. Like I think the fourth greatest composer of all time after Mozart, Beethoven, and Bach is Wagner. Wagner was a horrible human being, terrible person, but great composer. Does that mean we can't appreciate his music anymore because he was a bad person? I don't think so. I think we can love his music and think it's beautiful and then realize that he was a flawed human being. I love the writings of H.P. Lovecraft. He was undeniably a racist, bad guy. Bad guy in some ways, good guy in other ways, but great writer. We could appreciate his work. And then you have, of course, like Thomas Jefferson and George Washington and all those guys did incredible things for the furtherance of freedom and democracy. Didn't treat their slaves so good, had backwards views on the nature of human relationships in different races. And, both of those things can be true at the same time. And we don't have to whitewash them and say, oh, it doesn't matter the way they had slaves. It does matter. But we also don't have to say it doesn't matter that they founded America, because that matters too. Both of those things can be true at the same time. And I think people are just uncomfortable with complexity. People want to have a simple answer for everything.
Yeah, I think that's what you just said is very true. Complexity is very difficult, and the world is so unbelievably complex. None of us can comprehend it, and we're desperately trying to. So we want to simplify as quickly as possible. Mm-hmm. And I think you can see that in every aspect of life, whether it's judging a person's character from the past, where you see, I think a lot of the times these conspiracy theories that take off in popularity, it's a way for someone to make sense of the world that they just cannot understand.
Yeah.
Like, how could this happen? There must be a bad guy. Here's the bad guy. Conspiracy theory. And then you could do in a bunch of other different examples, but on judging people's character, there's one quote, and someone recently told to me, and it really struck me. It's St. John Bosco, Catholic saint, but they said, like a famous quote by him is, every time John Bosco saw someone that society would say is a great sinner, a criminal, a drunk, a drug user, someone who is obviously has a sin that is out in public, and everyone looks at that person and is like, wow. And John Bosco would say, there goes John Bosco, if not for the grace of God.
Right.
And I was like, even if you're not a believer, that's a great thing. Like, that could be me.
Right.
If it wasn't for some fortunate decisions or people in my life that helped guide me, and hopefully that's still a human being with dignity.
Right.
And if we had that mindset, you can understand and appreciate George Washington with his flaws and his
There's also a certain thing to be said about your dirty laundry being public, because everybody's got their secrets and their problems and their vices and things. And, some people, those things are made public, and some people they're not. And the people who are not made public, it's worth it. It's better for them. They have an easier time. But historical figures who do great things, we find out everything about their lives. We learn all their bad secrets and stuff, and we pretend that they're an anomaly because, oh, they're famous, so they did something bad. But like, everybody does bad things, you know? And like some people more than others, obviously. But I was thinking of like Louis C.K., who I regard as maybe the greatest living comedian. I think he's revolutionized comedy in a way that only like George Carlin and Lenny Bruce have done in the past. You know, he has a new bit out, and he's been kind of in exile for a while, but he's got a new bit out about how the president knows, you know, all of his darkest secrets about his like sexual preferences and stuff, and how horrible that is. It's like, man, it really sucks when the president knows what you're into privately in your private life. And like, it's another example of someone who I think is a great artist who did some things he shouldn't have done, and it became public knowledge. And, you know, both of those things are true. You know, we can appreciate his art and say he shouldn't have done those things. That was wrong at the same time.
Yeah. And I just think of one of my favorite thinkers, writers from a Catholic standpoint is Bishop Fulton Sheen, who's venerable, soon to be blessed, if you understand how that works in the Catholic Church. But I've read his biography where I know people who have known him or associated closely with him because he's recent, older people, and he struggled with vanity a lot. He had an award-winning TV show, top radio programmer, and a lot of people, some people have had rub-ins that I know with him where they're like, but I was like, it was a weakness of his. He was in the limelight, he struggled with vanity, but his writings and his books are just unbelievable. I was like, I can't write this. Like, gosh, if I ever became famous, which I probably won't, so safe to say, there's probably so much you could pick apart with me.
Yeah. That's why I think that like humility is the cardinal virtue of libertarianism, which may not be obvious if you talk to a lot of libertarians, but they may seem not very humble. But it's such an important feature of the philosophy of the world is complex. We don't understand everything. We don't know everything. We don't know what other people's situations are like. Maybe let them do their own thing and don't be too judgmental of them because, you know, we're not in their position. We don't know, and we can't decide for them. And so I think humility is so important to maintain.
I think at times I get too bullish in my opinions, and I remember where I get into debate with someone where I've been like accused of arrogance. I'm like, no, and I probably was giving off that perception. So I'll present that against myself. But my response had been like, no, this philosophy is a philosophy of humility that we don't know, we can't understand, so we cannot control from the top down. You just have to let people interact, do their things, pursue their goals, and things will unfold that are awesome and cool, and there'll be innovations that are surprising, and it'll be awesome. And you can't predict it. And I feel like, I think that's the cool part of the whole philosophy of liberty is the idea that not everything is empirical. I feel like we get into this age of scientism where everyone wants to measure everything and assign value to everything, and if we can do that, then we can actually like create utopia here on Earth. If I could measure everything, we could fix the world's problems. It sounds kind of nice if you think about it because there's a lot of problems, but then there's no surprise. And the great part of like innovators and great thinkers is they're going to come up with something that no one else could conceive of, and it can change the world. And that is super exciting to me. I'm actually going to take a little bit, another splash.
Oh, please do. Yes.
I know. I don't want to take all your delicious.
No. It's. I brought it to share. It's for you.
This might be, out of all the liquors we've tried, maybe it's too bold of a statement, my favorite one we've had.
Oh, I'm pleased to hear that. I like it a lot. I was very surprised because I wasn't a rum drinker before this. I always thought rum is made from sugarcane. It's too sweet. It's for people who put it in fruit juice and stuff. You don't drink it straight. And I was always more of a gin guy or sometimes a whiskey guy. I've been converted. I like rum now.
I was with you on that. And maybe the reason why I feel like in college when I was young and stupid, you would go get a plastic handle of Captain's, pour it in like Coke or orange juice or something, in a stupid plastic bottle and roll on over to that whatever that house party was. It was disgusting. Yeah. It wasn't that good. Or you do a shot of like spiced rum out of the freezer when you're young and dumb, and it just, maybe it gave me, but this is unbelievable. So
yeah, it's really nice. The wood flavor from the aging in the barrels just really comes out.
Yeah, absolutely delicious. But yeah, back, I guess, to bring all of this rabbit holing that we've done around...
Full circle.
Yeah, the outrage machine that we have in society. Yeah. It's definitely, again, I don't know... I always try to think, like, where did this problem start?
Well,
How do we get at it?
I just don't know why we care so much if people are offended by something. That's the thing that bothers me the most, is like, you can't say that it's offensive. Well, so, like, why does that matter if it's offensive or not, you know? If you don't like it, don't turn off the TV. Turn off the podcast, change the channel. You don't have to be offended if you don't want to be. You don't have to listen if you don't want to listen. But why does everyone else have to cater to your feelings?
But it's true, and but beyond that, not only do we get offended, do we go into outrage, but the offender, we have to almost go. If you get enough people, they will hunt you down and ruin your life.
Yeah.
They will find where you work. They will make sure you're unemployed. I'm like, I can't sit there and think of anyone that I want their life to be ruined. Like, I want them to be jobless and have no prospects, and let's just crush them. Like, I can't think of one person in life that I hate that much.
No, I know. I was on another room in Clubhouse not too long ago with Brett Weinstein, and they were talking about how to deal with free speech on Clubhouse. And everybody was like, well, we can't have people saying whatever they want. Imagine what they could say. It'd be horrible. And Brett Weinstein was the only one who was saying, yeah, we can. Let everybody say what they want. And they would say, well, you're Jewish, Brett. Like, what if someone says something horribly anti-Semitic? We can't allow that. And he's like, why can't we allow that? It's in a private room. They can talk however they want. They're, like, you don't have to listen to it if you don't want to listen to it. Don't go into the room if you don't want to hear it. What's the problem? I mean, you can do that in private houses anyway. If I go over to your house, we can say whatever you want. Nobody's listening, And so why do you need to be regulated on these social media apps? Why can't we let people say what they want to say? And people are very resistant to that idea, by and large. There's very few people who think that's a good idea, but I do. I'm like, what's the problem? Let everybody say what they want to say, and if you don't want to listen to it, don't listen to it.
It seems so simple when you say that, but the question I keep getting back to is, why is it so hard for us to get to that point?
I don't know.
Why do people sit there?
People have this need to control other people and say, well,
right.
Even if you're saying something I don't like, even if I don't hear it, even if it's in a private room, I'm upset about that, and I want you to stop saying it. Like, I just don't get that. And it's always justified on this, like, oh, well, what if people are plotting, terrorist attacks? What if people are plotting violence? You can plot violence in your living room.
Yeah.
I mean, it reminds me of this Adam Smith quote about, this is a little bit of a different context because he's talking about, like, collusion among businesses. And he says that whenever businesses get together, it's always to collude against the public interest. But you can never you can't do anything to stop them without really abridging freedom. And I'm like, that's just a price of freedom you have. If you're going to let people have any kind of freedom of expression at all, which I think is super, super important for advancing knowledge and discourse and everything, you're going to have to accept that some people are going to use that freedom of speech to plan bad things. Whether it's on a social media app or in the privacy of their living room, it's going to happen. And the only way to stop that is to just have complete totalitarianism, trying to prevent anybody from saying anything you don't like at any time. And I think that cost is way, way higher of that than the occasional cost of someone planning something bad.
To that point, like, when you say, like, you have to be willing for people to say something bad, or there's a risk with liberty,
Mm-hmm.
and you often hear, like, maybe it was a Thomas Jefferson quote, I prefer a dangerous freedom than a safe tyranny or despotism. I can't remember the exact
hard yoke of freedom versus the easy liberty, which is like Paradise Lost. We talked about that recently.
But I kind of disagree with that sentiment that people are always like, oh, freedom's dangerous. I don't think freedom's dangerous. I think tyranny's more dangerous.
I agree. I mean, tyranny is more dangerous. Freedom is dangerous because you're letting people do anything they want, and sometimes the things they want are going to be dangerous things. But it's less dangerous than tyranny. I agree with you completely.
It's like privacy, without going down that rabbit hole, is people are like, oh, like when we had the Patriot Act come out after 9/11. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, you'll be kept more safe because, we'll stop terrorist attacks. Maybe we'll listen to your phone calls. And of course, 300 million people. But that was the excuse. And anyone that opposed it, like, oh, stop it. You have nothing to hide.
Yeah.
But are you really? You're not more safe if your privacy is invaded in the name of tyranny. You're actually now. You could be exposed for whatever reason. Liberty is more safe.
This is the fallacy that people make, is they assume that there's like a perfect condition, a utopia that they can get to. And they're like, well, if they can point to a fault in the system, oh, look, people use their freedom to do something bad. Therefore, we should just scrap it all and go to complete totalitarianism. Well, there's no system that's going to be completely safe. There's no system that's not going to have any dangers. And yeah, you can point to problems with complete freedom of expression where people can do bad things with that. But then if you try to stop that, you can point to much worse problems with that system as well. And no one ever talks about that. They're just like, oh, yeah, well, this is a problem, so we got to fix it. But there's no perfect solution to anything. And it's all trade-offs, and you have to decide which ones you're willing to accept and which ones you're not. And for me, like, the dangers of liberty are far less onerous than the dangers of control.
Yep, and I think you hit on two things there. One, no one understands trade-offs. Oh, we can just look at the COVID. lockdown situation.
No one understands trade-offs.
But also beyond that is this idea of utopia. Even though you ask anyone on the street, you could say, is utopia possible? And I think majority of people, if not everyone, would say no. But for some reason, we actually think, or we're pursuing it in this world, which is impossible.
You find one problem and you say, look, there's a problem, therefore we have to redo everything and change everything. And you're like, well, how do you know it may fix that problem, but how do you know that's not going to create worse problems?
Utopia is not possible, but I think we actually believe it, or we really want to get to utopia. And even if you ask all the individuals, they'd all be like, nah, that's fantasy. But
this is an argument I have about anarchy all the time. I'm an anarchist, as regular viewers will know, and people always come up to me and be like, well, what about this? If you had an anarchist system, this might happen. I'm like, yeah, it might. That's true. I don't have an argument against that. But so what? It's just because something bad might happen in a system doesn't mean that system is the worst system and that you shouldn't adopt that system, because something bad is going to happen in every system. I can point to any system you could propose, whether it's socialist, communist, fascist, democratic, republican, any of them, and say, oh, there's a problem with that system. That doesn't mean that system is wrong just because you point to one problem with it. It means that no system is perfect.
I actually heard, and we won't, I think one of my favorite episodes we've ever did, and it might be our most listened to episode, is the episode where we talked about anarchy, where I kind of argued against it or didn't think it was feasible. Mm-hmm. But I recently heard, without going too much detail, a great argument for anarchy, which actually gave me pause. Which I was like, someday I'm gonna have to revisit the anarchy debate with Logan to hash that out.
I feel like if 2020 didn't get people there, nothing's gonna get people there, because I can't imagine a better argument for anarchy than 2020.
I think I want to save it for a future episode, but I am almost now convinced anarchy is feasible, but there's a discovery process to get there, and if the discovery process does happen, everyone will jump to it.
It's just astounding to me that people have gone through 2020 and still think the government is capable of doing a good job at anything.
It's hard.
I just don't understand it. I still have people coming out the other side and they're like, "Oh yeah, well we have to make sure the government's in charge of healthcare." Did you not see what happened? This is the worst possible disaster. How are you possibly thinking that's a good thing?
This is back to our point earlier in this conversation about simplifying. Maybe the idea of good government in its own, that is a giant conspiracy theory we've all accepted to believe. It's the simplest thing. Like, oh my gosh, world's complex. Mm-hmm. How do we deal with this? Oh, government.
Just put a smart guy in charge and give him unlimited power.
Government.
What could go wrong?
We all believe it. It's all good. It's all conspiracy. It's a conspiracy we've all accepted, so it's not a conspiracy anymore.
Right.
It's just a fallacy that we live by. And every time, and then the way we get around government's mistakes is we have partisan politics, so we can isolate one side that's not our side and say, those are the guys who ruined my utopian government conspiracy fantasy, and then we can keep going along with it as long as we can isolate half of the room who is doing the right back at us.
Cool.
I just came up with that. Maybe that's a bunch of baloney and someone will be laughing at me, but it just hit me.
Well, maybe it'll translate into views if people are laughing at you.
There you go.
That's good.
Comedy.
Love it. Thank you, Mike.
Cheers, sir.